Just a reminder, you can catch me recording this podcast live on AMP. AMP is a new live radio app that lets you call in and chat with me in person while recording. Get the app on Apple's App Store and make sure you follow me at John Middlekauff to get notified when I go live. What is going on, everybody? John Middlekauff, 3 and Out Podcast. Go subscribe wherever you listen. If you're watching this on YouTube, hammer that like button. Subscribe to the Volumes YouTube page. Leave a comment. A lot of football content coming up. Talked to Cam Hayward yesterday, also on the Volumes YouTube page, as well as on the podcast feed. So go check that out. We will dive into the Jets being on Hard Knocks and some other NFL news circulating. But before we dive into football, I need you to grab your smartphone. I need you to go to the App Store, and I need you to download the Gametime app. They are the official ticketing app of this podcast. We love those guys. We use those guys. And I need you to use those guys. So download the Gametime app, and first-time users type in the promo code JOHN, that's my name, John, very easy to spell, John, and get $20 off your first pair of tickets. Games, football games, baseball games, concerts, comedy shows, they got you covered. Gametime, download the Gametime app, promo code JOHN. Okay, as of recording this podcast, it's not official yet, but all signs are pointing to the Jets going on Hard Knocks, quote unquote, against their will. Mainly because nobody, the Bears, the Jets, all the Patriots want any part of, I guess the Patriots aren't technically eligible because they made the playoffs a year ago, but all the teams that are eligible are like, do not come to our building. We don't want to do it. And the NFL forces you to do it. They time and time again. Last year, the Lions didn't want to do it. It's out of your control as an NFL franchise. My overall take now has been pretty consistent with this show. It is not relevant anymore. I actually don't even think it's needed. And I was just thinking about every single great show of my lifetime from the late 90s, Friends, Seinfeld. Hell, when I was really, really young, my dad loved Cheers, to recent memory, Game of Thrones, Succession, you name it. They all come to an end. They don't go on forever. Every show has a shelf life. Now, I understand this is quote-unquote reality television. It's not a scripted television show, and they change it team to team. But I do think if we look at it like all these series that we have all loved, whatever it may be, whether you like comedy, whether you like serious stuff, whether it's Billions, whether it's The Sopranos, whether it's The Wire, whatever show that are your go-tos or your favorites over the years, they all ended. And that's what I think it's time for Hard Knocks. I just think it's over. I think we've seen it now for multiple decades. It peaked out a long time ago. And I heard Albert Breer telling Colin this, and he is so right. The big difference 15, 20 years ago, I remember I started watching this when I was in high school. And I graduated in 2003 from high school. So I started watching this in the early 2000s. I remember the Ravens, the Dallas Cowboys. It was so raw and real. You had never seen anything like it. It took you, behind enemy lines in the sense of you were going to these meetings with the coaches and the personnel people. You're like, if you loved sports, you weren't getting that anywhere else. And the coaches, when they would go around in training camp talking shit about the draft picks or a veteran doesn't have it or being positive about a guy, it was incredible. And then over the years, as social media happened, as the NFL really exploded, it dumbed down. Well, over the last 4 or 5 years, this little thing called YouTube has been an avenue for all of us. We all use it that are in the content creation business. Well, that goes for NFL teams. The Jets are a good example of, I watched, 30 minutes on the Jets offseason that they produced, which was essentially their version of Hard Knocks. And if I'm a Jets fan, if I'm an Eagles fan, if I'm a whoever fan, the Colts have been doing this for years. I get inside access on my team's website. And unlike 20 years ago when it was like if your team was on Hard Knocks, you were finding out about players who were, on the come up, players who were holding on for dear life, players who the coaches did not like. That's not the case anymore. Everything is just so surface level. It honestly feels kind of fake. Now, it's still entertaining. It's the NFL. It has its moments on a given episode, but I think the totality of the 4 or 5 episodes is kind of boring. Now, I understand I might be on the extreme end of it, but I've talked to enough people that I think this show has really, really lost its luster. And when I think of all these other great shows, and listen, Hard Knocks, it's a transcendent show series when it comes to professional sports. Everything we've seen since, right? I remember several years ago being bored, flipping around Amazon Prime and stumbling on essentially the Hard Knocks of Man City. I'm not even a soccer guy. It was awesome. They've done it with baseball. They've done it with all sorts. They've done it in college. University of Michigan did it years ago. It changed the game. But I just don't think it's needed. I think the NFL is big enough now. I think all these teams take enough. Pride's probably the wrong word because they are profiting from this, but have in-house production crews that are doing it. I just don't think it's necessary. And I do think at this point in time, it's holding on for dear life. And while the Jets on paper are an incredible story, add Aaron Rodgers, get Hackett, who was just fired from the Denver Broncos, have a head coach that is he on the hot seat, have all these young star ascending players, have this quarterback that they drafted a couple years ago, number 2 overall, who feels like his career's in peril. So they got a lot. They got a star would be strong. Let me rewind that. They have a former top 10 pick at left tackle whose career is not headed in the right direction. So they got a lot of moving parts, good and bad. So like the storylines, it's not hard to create, but we know that the NFL has really dialed back how controversial this show gets in terms of the access that they give out. Because clearly when it goes to the chopping block and it gets edited before any of us see it, the team now gets to put their hands on it. And it's just like a PG version. And any of us that started, if you're my age or older, that saw the raw, hell, not even rated R, it was like NC-17. It's hard to go back. And we're never going back. So I understand their contracts, and I'm sure they have a long deal with HBO. My overall take would just, like a lot of other shows, or literally every other show ever, just cancel the series. Had a hell of a run, not needed anymore. The NBA draft just happened, and I got to be honest, after the 3rd pick, I turned it off. I thought the production was terrible. It was just a little too fluffy for me, and I didn't know any of the players. Beside the top 3 guys, dude from France, Brandon Miller, and the reason I really know Brandon Miller, it's not like I'm watching Alabama basketball, is because of the the shooting incident that happened. And then Scoot Henderson, just because, I follow the NBA, so we've been hearing about this name. All the other guys have no clue who they are. The production of the NBA draft. I've been watching drafts, the NBA and the NFL now, probably for going on 3 decades. And I don't know who that production show is for. Like, what are we trying to accomplish? And so it didn't get my eyes. Change the channel. I don't even know what I watched. I think I might have gone for a walk or something. But by the end of the first round, there was this guy named Cam Whitmore who was supposed to go in like the top 6 or 7 picks. And he ends up going number 20 after teams like the Miami Heat and the Golden State Warriors pass on him. And this was a guy that universally on all the boards, media-wise, was like a top 6 or 7 player. And this happens every single year in football. And it just shows you the information that is on the outside is not the information that is on the inside. So I love mock drafts as much as anybody. I love talking about the draft. I love talking about prospects. It's very, very enjoyable. But when you do these mocks and you do these big boards, the media is not the market. The market is the teams, and they determine where guys go. And it happens every single year. Oh, what a steal, especially in football, right? You got this guy at the end of the 2nd round. Well, every single team in the league passed on that guy multiple times. Now, he might end up becoming A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf. But at the time he's coming out, there are clearly red flags internally around the league on these players. And I think the hard part is, and it's become more and more difficult in modern day times because so many people are kind of scared of social media. It was easy with Jalen Carter, right? There was an incident when people lost their life, right? But I had been hearing negative things about Jalen Carter for over 12 months. But it's not really my job to come out and crush or bash a kid. I don't really care enough. But the negative innuendo is probably the wrong way to put it, but just, aura around following him from the program was very, very loud in NFL circles. But there's this line because as a scout, as a general manager, as an assistant GM, even as an assistant coach, when I go into these schools or I call my buddies at these programs and they start shitting on a kid and they start crushing his character, you are very protective of letting that information out because then it makes the program look bad. And these programs are very, very careful about what information becomes public. Like they will tell their, professional brethren what the negative situation is with an individual player. But they often are very, very tight-lipped about, hey, keep this between us because we don't want it coming out that we are bashing the player. And, hearing some different podcasts and stuff come out that like Villanova was not super high on this guy around NBA circles. Part of the reason that he fell to number 20. But when all these media people are anointing this guy as a top 6 or 7 player, it just shows you how irrelevant all that is because the market is not these mock drafts. And it goes the opposite way too. I remember I was reading one of the blogs that Florio put out. I think Dan Pompey, longtime writer, he writes some fantastic like long form stuff. I remember he did a long expose years ago on Josh McDaniels about it. He was like changing his whole thing. Like he would write positive notes to himself. It was all about working on his failures, the Denver situation. It's really paid off. So he wrote this long thing where he talked to all these people about Jalen Hurts, Howie, Jeffrey Lurie, Doug Peterson. And that's a good example. If you just polled most scouts around the NFL Jalen's year, I bet most guys would have had him 4th, 5th round. I just scout from my couch now, but I got a pretty good idea if I watch a guy at a school play. When you play at a school like Oklahoma, Alabama, LSU, USC, I'm watching you play, even if it's on my couch, 4 or 5 times during the year. And it's like, I'm not going to be able to judge a guard. But when it comes to quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, maybe a pass rusher, by the end of the year, I got a pretty good idea. And I was not very high on the guy. I would have said mid 4th, 5th round. I thought he was a running back. Now, I thought he could have been a really good running back. I'm dead serious. I thought he could have been a top 5 running back in the NFL, and he's proven to be an elite runner of the football. But what I didn't know is what has separated him since getting into the NFL. His work ethic, his desire, his willingness to do whatever it takes, how great of a teammate he is, how quickly the older guys on that team, guys that are heading to the Hall of Fame, gravitated toward him, which is obviously the complete opposite with Carson Wentz, who, not even in the NFL right now. Carson Wentz is sitting on the sideline. Well, of course he is. There are a lot of questions with Carson Wentz, like people don't like him. Well, Carson Wentz is no longer a starting quarterback. I don't want a backup quarterback that people don't like. Who wants to be around that guy? Most of the backup quarterbacks, when you look around the NFL that aren't on a rookie contract, are older guys that people liked. I saw a good quote going around social media over the last couple weeks. And Tom Moore. Remember Howard Mudd, Tom Moore, the 2 old curmudgeon guys were always there, those great Colts teams with Peyton. And I worked with Howard with the Eagles. I mean, he's a curmudgeon, but he was an elite offensive line coach. Ask Jason Kelsey about him. And Tom Moore, who I think was more the passing game, Howard was more the offensive line. And they asked why they didn't put more resources. Or no, someone asked him, it was John Gruden. It was when John Gruden was doing Monday Night Football. And clearly they would have a lot of Colts games with Peyton Manning. And he would go to practice and he was taken back why the backup quarterback didn't get any reps. And Tom said, because if Peyton goes down, we're fucked. And we don't practice, fucked. I was like, what a line. But it's so true. Peyton went down. They're the worst team in the league. When you have Peyton Manning on your team, you're all in on Peyton Manning. There is no backup plan. And there are things that you can't quantify. And part of this article, I think, was how he's talked about in his couple decades with the Eagles, how many times backup quarterbacks have had a huge impact, going back to Jeff Garcia, to Michael Vick, to obviously Foles, and now with Jalen. But they really, really believed in the person. And clearly he's better than anyone could have expected. But they took him where most people would not have taken him. I feel pretty good, and I by no means can text someone on every team. But I've been around this league long enough. I've been watching players long enough to go, I bet most teams did not have him remotely that close. I would say the majority of teams had him as a third-day pick and would not have pulled the trigger on Jalen Hurts in the second round. That move changed their franchise. I mean, it really did. It's one thing like the 49ers. Do they get credit for drafting Brock Purdy? Of course, because anytime you draft any player, whether it's the number 1 overall pick or it's the last pick in the draft, you had to make the call to your guy in the draft room to say, write his name down so you get credit. But let's be real. Why did they draft Brock Purdy? Because they wanted to ensure that they got him as an undrafted free agent. If they loved him and thought he would be half of what they saw at the end of 2022, they would have drafted him like the 3rd or 4th round. So there's a huge element of luck to that. Yeah, there's an element of luck to drafting Jalen Hurts. But this whole draft is taking information you have based on your own experiences. And it's easy with a guy like Jalen. Everyone's swearing by him, right? Nick Saban, Lincoln Riley, they are all saying good things. You get guys, under the umbrella of Jalen Carter, and Georgia's had some of these guys over the years. 2 years ago, some of the guys that were coming out, Nakobe Dean, super high-level guy. Then there were some other guys, I'm not going to name names, that I think, depending on who you talk to with the program, would go, yeah, but that's part of the deal. And then it's just about managing, can we handle it or can we not? And then there's the factor of the medical. And I've said this forever. As a general manager, as a head coach, you know nothing about the medical in terms of when a doctor goes, listen, we see some things there. It could be degenerate. It might not be, but it's definitely risky. It's on you to we'll just take the risk, right? You didn't go to medical school. Most of these coaches have had a whistle around their neck since they were 22, 23 years old. So the whole draft process, it's funny to watch the reaction when a guy, quote unquote, falls or a guy, quote unquote, goes way early. And then we also, Jaime Jaquez, the dude from UCLA, who's, 23 years old, who's been at UCLA forever. A lot of people thought, fringe first round pick, but he goes to the Heat at pick 18. Everyone's like, love the pick. Well, of course you do. Because you're like, well, this guy was one of UCLA's best players over the last couple of years. They've been one of the best players. He's older, not a great athlete, but just a really, really good basketball player. Would you like him if he went to the Hornets? Would you like him if he went to the Orlando Magic or the Houston Rockets? Probably not. But if he goes to the Heat, you're like, fuck, that's going to work. Dude's going to play. He's going to be a factor. And it's no different in football, right? Jalen Carter. How many of you guys that are Bears fans, that are Lions fans, that are Falcons fans, you guys DM me, you're like, why didn't we take him? Why didn't we take him? Too risky. You guys do not have the infrastructure to do it. But the Eagles take him like, genius pick. They got all of his teammates. They got Fletcher Cox. They got Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson to corral him. It's going to work. And it might. And it might not. No one truly knows. You're dealing with humans. But fascinating to watch it all play out. Love a good draft. I love the reaction to the reaction. Everyone, the moment a guy's picked, everyone gives a reaction. And then like a day or two later, everyone's reacting to the reaction. I just find the whole process fascinating in the couple days post a draft. A couple other quick things. I tweeted this out. Coach football kids. Paradise Valley, it's where I'm staying right now. I'm moving probably 20 minutes north of here, but it's by far the richest area in the greater Scottsdale. It's homes going, for anywhere from $6-7 million to $20 million. It's the famous picture of Kingsbury lives in Paradise Valley. Ton of players live here. Former players live here, from the Carson Palmers to the Larry Fitzgeralds to the JJ Watts, and just people with way more money than them. I saw my girlfriend's in real estate, and I was grabbing some lunch earlier today. She's like, you see the head coach for the Cardinals just bought a $10.5 million house. I was like, do you know what's crazy? It's not like he's a 10-year coordinator and he's been making seven figures. He's only been a coordinator for a couple years. And then he became a head coach. And I remember a guy told me years ago, I was like, why are you taking this job? And he was a quarterback coach going for an offensive coordinator. And he's like, the money is so big, I can't turn it down. They're going to give me, $1.5 million a year and guarantee 3 years. I mean, we're talking $4 or $5 million. And then if we have a good year, I'm a year away, hell, maybe 6 months away from not just interviewing for a head coach, but if the interview goes well, I become a guy with a $30-40 million contract. And, Maria, she's got some different websites she can go to, the real estate agents. And I saw how much this guy put down. Let's just say it wasn't that much. The loan he got is massive. So to qualify for a loan of that size, guy's making some serious coin. And I would imagine Jonathan Gannon, I mean, he's the head coach for, quote unquote, the cheapest organization in the league. My guess he's making $7-8 million a year. So when the bank sees, he's got a guaranteed $7 million coming, whether he keeps the job or gets fired over the next 4 years, it's a crazy amount of money. I've been hammering this home for a long time that the NFL has turned into Wall Street on grass. Everyone's getting rich. Everybody. Players, coaches, GMs, obviously the owners, the TV partners, everyone surrounded with the NFL right now is benefiting. Hell, I can raise my own hand. I've directly benefited as just someone that talks about football. You can't say the same thing for baseball. Hell, most baseball managers don't even make seven figures. There's no big baseball podcasts, right? The players are getting rich. The owners, I guess, depending on what team you own. But in basketball, you're talking about a very, very small number of people. And beside the head coaches in basketball, I remember talking to someone around the NBA. I'm like, how many assistants make seven figures? They're like, well, it kind of depends on the team. Like the Warriors, for example, they had Kenny Atkinson. Mike Brown was their assistant forever. They always had a number 2 guy making a lot of money. And certain teams do. But a lot of teams do not have a assistant coach making seven figures. There is not a coordinator in the NFL, offensive or defensive. And obviously not every offensive coordinator even calls the plays because sometimes the head coach does. That makes under seven figures. So the amount of money that is getting thrown around with these coaches, it's why there's so much pressure. They're getting paid so much, but it's really just a line item now that these television deals have gotten so astronomical. And unlike golf, who had to get in bed with the Saudis because they could not sustain paying $20 million purses to elevated events. They couldn't do it. It was all giant fugazi. It was fake money. It was not a sustainable thing. I mean, it was going to come crashing down and still might. We'll see. And we'll see if the thing passes through the government, but which it probably will because, the government's in bed with the Saudis. So that's a whole nother topic that we'll discuss on Go Low coming up this week. But ultimately, it's pretty crazy how much coin these first-time head coaches and definitely these coordinators are making. And I saw Sean McDermott. I think this happened on Friday. Him and Brandon Beane got extended. And I think there's been a lot of people, ask me, do they think is Sean McDermott on the hot seat? People on social media, like, why are you extending this guy? I think people forget how shitty it was for Buffalo till he got there. I'm pretty sure. Remember when Kyle Williams, when Andy Dalton had the comeback and he was crying in the locker room? The Bills hadn't made the playoffs in almost 2 decades. And I looked before I hopped on here and pressed record that over the last three seasons, 13, 11, and 13. That's their win totals the last 3 years. They have won the division every single year for 3 straight years in a division that was clearly basically for 2 decades dominated by Belichick and Brady. And they're going to be the favorite to win that division again this season. You win the division 3 years in a row. That means you're hosting home playoff games. Think of the last 2 years. Beat the Dolphins, beat the Patriots. Then you start beating your division rivals in playoff games. I know they had a big letdown the last 2 years, right? Last year was an ass kicking. They got worked. And 2 years ago, I mean, a freaky ending. It was coaches are to blame, but it took a pretty crazy circumstance for that thing not to work out. Whatever, the Chiefs gained 40 yards in 13 seconds. You probably could simulate that 100 times, and you would only get a field goal attempt that you could make once, and they did. And it worked, and the Chiefs deserve credit. But the Bills, this is a reality. Sometimes when life changes, your expectations change, right? When you get your first job out of college, if someone pays you 30, 40 grand, you're like a pig in shit. You're like, I got some money, I got a job, I got a place to go. And then as you get older, maybe you get in your mid 30s and you're making 200 grand and you got a family, your expectations of just life changes. One point in time, everything in life is all relative. Things that made you happy when you're 18 no longer make you happy sometimes when you're 30 or when you're 50, right? Just life changes. And once you start sniffing success, I don't care what industry you're in, but definitely in sports, and you start getting close, you forget really quickly how dark the times were. I see it with the Niners. It's like Kyle Shanahan, what? He's been to 3 NFC Championship games in 4 years. I remember for about 15 years before Harbaugh, it was a lot of Mike Nolans, Mike Singletaries, and some Jim Tom Sulas and Chip Kelly mixed in there as well. Like, do you want to win the Super Bowl? Only one guy can really do that, right? And right now, Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes feel like they have the market cornered a little bit. And if Tom Brady, now that he's gone, like, Chiefs are going to be the favorite again this year. So, like, you're going to the playoffs. Listen, I'm hard on Mike McCarthy, right? I don't blame anyone that's hard on Mike McCarthy. But if he's winning 12-plus games every year and they're hosting playoff games or winning one, I know they haven't been in the NFC Championship game in almost 3 decades, but times could be a lot worse for Dallas Cowboy fans. Remember with Jason Garrett going 8-8 every year, how that felt? That sucked. Now going 12 wins, winning a first-round playoff game, beating the shit out of Brady, having a close game with the Niners, could be a lot worse.